The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God.
And Mary said, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has looked with favor upon the lowliness of his servant. Surely from now on, all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things, and he has sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and to his descendants forever."
Our God, we ask that you would open us now to hear the words that you have prepared. We ask that the words that are spoken and those that reside in our hearts would be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. All this season, friends, we have been discussing the preparations that we make in anticipation of the Christmas day and season. We celebrate and remember hope in these dark and early days through the birth of a child. And few events are as life-changing as welcoming a new human into the world. I remember my parents referred to their time before and after children as BC, before children, and AC, once we got here, because it was a significant game changer. And all the nativity scenes, we don't really lean into how upending this news was for Mary, or her cousin Elizabeth for that matter. An unexpected pregnancy is a whole different story. It says that when Mary first got this news, she was confused and disturbed, trying to understand what the angel could mean. And the main angel told her, "Don't be frightened, because God has decided to bless you." And Mary was bewildered. She said, "How in the world can this be?" And I feel like Mary probably was not saying this part out loud, but "Angel, this doesn't quite feel like a blessing to me. It's like Lily Tomlin says, if love is the answer, can you please rephrase the question? Because that is not what this feels like in this moment. She's told by the angel that God has been gracious to her and that she's going to bear a son and he'll be great, a child of God. And Mary is suspended in this moment when she looks at what she had thought her life would be, and now she is faced with a whole other reality. In this moment, before Mary could embrace what was to come, she had to release the expectations that she held before of what her life was going to look like. She had to break open before she could receive this blessing. It's like some seeds have to crack before they can germinate and take root. Or it's like they say, caterpillars aren't what they used to be. All right. It's hard to tell if you're out there with all the face covering. Mary wasn't looking for this, and neither, for that matter, was her cousin Elizabeth. Elizabeth was well past menopause. Like, maybe at some point Mary wanted a baby, maybe at some point Elizabeth wanted one, but this was not the time. This was not the plan. They had their life in order. Thank you very much. It's like that 6-word short story, not quite what I was planning, right? I imagine they had to think about this blessing before they could get past the devastating part of it. A friend of mine recently was writing about looking back a decade hence on a pretty traumatic anniversary for her, and now she was in a wholly different place than she was when those events took place. And she said, I grew stronger and became more intrinsically beautifully myself, just as the divine created to me. And she said, while I haven't saved nations from hunger, I know that lives were saved because I survived. I know that what was intended for ill was somehow transformed into surprising good. She said, it doesn't erase the harm, but the divine's intention in that rescue sowed seeds of wholeness, passion, strength, grace, and abundant love. And through this, the divine wasted nothing, and by trusting the truth, neither did I. Before that blessing, though, she had to break out of where she was before. We never know what choices our path, what path our choices will put us on. Like Mary, like any parent, she couldn't have imagined what would happen with this child, the fullness of his life. But this passage lets us know that she had a pretty good idea. I mean, speaking of breaking open what no longer fits, every year at this time, my pastor friends start kind of leaning into hymns that they find problematic. Mary, did you know? Yes, read Luke 1. She told us. Yes, Mary, she knew. She didn't have the full picture, but yes, listen to the woman. She was telling you, I have a pretty good idea. This kid is going to turn things upside down. And as far as that goes for hymns that maybe we didn't think all the way through, God bless the little drummer boy. I mean, yes, he pum-pum-pummed. That was all he had to offer her, but Mary, exhausted, just having given birth, gotten Jesus to sleep, is approached by a young man who thinks, hey, what this girl needs is a drum solo. You didn't read the room, little drummer boy. So sometimes we get so caught up in the idea of what this looked like. We get sort of seduced by the creche and the pastel colors that we miss what was really happening in this. This upended people's lives. This is not what they were planning. They had to crack wide open, and I can't imagine that felt very good, at least initially. So yes, I think Mary really knew. And her song that she sings in this passage that we heard from Colleen this morning comes in a couple of different parts. And this text is considered really revolutionary. They wouldn't let it be read in India for years. They wouldn't let it be read in a lot of places in Latin America. Guatemala said, no, we are not letting the regular people hear this because they're going to start thinking that the mighty will be brought down and the lowly will come up. So y'all can just shut it on that text. We'd just soon you'd not read that part out loud. Keep it to yourselves. Because in this song, she sings a praise to God for things past and present and for what will surely come. She testifies to God's care for her and God's care for others. And this message isn't just for her, it's for all the world. It's for all of those who know rejection and humility and sometimes humiliation. This reminds us of what might be a helpful multi-part test for justice. Like, how are we doing as a society? We read this passage and we love it, but we might want to turn some of these questions on ourselves. And a way to sort of ascertain how we are faring is to ask, how are the least powerful doing in our society? And would any one of us want to swap places with them right now? And if the answer is no, then we still have a lot of work to be done to realize these promises that Mary sang about that day. We are, as Wendell Berry says, we're to decide to live by the laws of mercy and justice, not just when it's convenient. Before Czechoslovakia's Velvet Revolution, as they called it, then playwright and dissident and later democratically elected president Václav Havel wrote that the real question is whether the brighter future is always really that distant. What if, on the contrary, it's been here for a long time already, and only our own blindness and weakness has prevented us from seeing it around us and within us, and kept us from developing it? It's here. We just have to break open and give it room. The Magnificat, this song of Mary's, is translated from the Latin, which means, "My soul magnifies the Lord." This unwed teenage mother that we focus on this morning is remarkable because her choices did, in fact, change the world. In the midst of her circumstance, she wasn't powerless. She transformed what could have been considered judgment into a song of joy, and as the poet Pierre Chetkin writes, made the best decision even when there was no choice. A little while after this passage, it says that Mary meets up with her kinswoman Elizabeth, and she sings out this good news. And this is not a lullaby. And by choosing her, God makes a claim in the world. It says that in her song, God scattered the arrogant in the way of thinking in their hearts, which means to think someone who thinks they have it all figured out, that we don't have any need of anyone else or what God may be saying. And this breaking open that we hear about says that there may be something more going on than we fully intuit. It requires a certain humility, because sometimes our expectations have to be broken open so that we can receive this new thing that God is doing. And again, this happened in the midst of Mary's life. It wasn't great. She was still an unmarried teenager when she chose to rejoice in the midst of this. We like to sanitize Christmas. It looks a lot better. But this wasn't always true. In the Victorian era, Christmas songs really leaned into the agony of a lot of what happened, what Herod's slaughter of the innocents. I mean, but we might sometimes prefer the lullaby of Away in the Manger, no crying he makes. We're about to dedicate a baby in a little bit, and I suspect, I'm not going to put you on the spot, Sarah, but I bet he made some crying. Yeah, he did. And you know, like, I suspect that if Jesus as an infant was anything like Jesus as an adult, he could see a lot in the world that was worth crying about. I imagine that baby wailed because when he grew up, he had a set of lungs and he knew what to do with them. But sometimes we want to lose interest in those uncomfortable parts. But this part of the Advent story reminds us that sometimes the cracks are where, as Leonard Cohen says, where the light gets in. Jesus didn't enter a world of sparkly Christmas cards or warm spiritual sentiment. He came into a world that was in pain, with dysfunction, with brokenness. Jesus was born an oppressed person, a refugee, someone who became a victim to the powers that be. And this is who we are reminded that God comes to again and again, those who in their weakness become a sign for the world of the might of God. You know, where do you think Jesus got some of his best material from? His mother. His mother. You need look no further than this initial, if you want to call it lullaby, to see where Jesus gets some of his greatest hits. You know, Mary's acceptance is pretty amazing. She didn't pray the world's most common prayer, "Thy will be changed." Instead, she said, "Here I am. As you have spoken, so be it." She didn't take the easy way out. Instead, she moved forward in this radical love. No doubt, I'm certain that she was scared, that she was full of questions, that she had a lot of doubt, that she had grief over what wasn't going to be in her life. She released what she thought would be so that she could embrace what would in fact be her life. That's a piece of work to do. When has God asked something of you that seemed impossible? And then what shifted in order to open you up so that you could receive this? And once Mary accepted this truth, she began to tell others. Like, we had this trope of people passing out cigars when a baby's going to be born. It's 2021. People don't pass out cigars anymore. But, or bubblegum cigars. But she didn't do that. She started passing out the good news. And I imagine her neighbors thought, wow, this is some song you're singing, Mary. But she essentially was saying, if God can do this for me, what else might God do? God's mighty arm has done tremendous things, scattered the proud and the haughty, bringing down rulers from their thrones, exalting the humble and filling the hungry with good things, and sending the rich away with empty hands. All evidence would have pointed to Mary responding quite differently. But she claimed joy in the midst of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. This has been quite a season for a lot of people. And I think what we know is the only way out of this is to keep going through it. What if, like Václav Havel suggested, we are already living in a kind of paradise and we need only to break open what is holding us back from visualizing it? What if all the sweet stuff that quenches all our longings is already here? In this now but not yet that John the Baptist proclaimed. In many ways, this season reminds us that grief and love are sisters. A friend of mine was writing recently about how in the season we can had these competing impulses of grief and love, and she was encouraging us to lean into what she says, the hole in your heart. She goes, feel that hole in your heart and love from there. That same degree of vulnerability in the face of how temporary our life is and how inevitable our separation from those we love. And so she suggested that bittersweet quality would be something that we could lean into in this season, that breaking open. Because if we fully love, there's also that deep feeling that this too will pass away in this way. When we love someone, the potential loss of that person is profound. So here's a practice. Feel your heart, where it is possible to have a kind of whole form. Like where it was full before, there may be an emptiness there. So don't try to fill it in the same way. Maybe your discipline in this moment is to let yourself experience all of that and allow that openness, that wound, that pain, all of that commingling without closing your heart, and let love in that place at the same time. Maybe we're breaking open to a whole other way of experiencing this. Because Advent is in many ways the subversion of our expectations of how the world functions. The greatest Christmas song in history wasn't Feliz Navidad or Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer, but this revolutionary song by this teenager 2,000 years ago. There's a pattern to her song. God brings down the rulers and lifts up the humble. God fills the hungry with good things and sends the rich empty away. God scatters those who are proud in their inmost thoughts and is mindful of the humble state of those who serve. This takes hearts and minds that are willing to crack open, to hold more than they did before. God reverses all our expectations. But in order for us to receive this new gift, we have to release what is no longer serving God or life. And the common thread here, both in Elizabeth's recognition and Mary's response, is this kind of anticipatory joy, celebrating what has begun but what is not yet fully into view. This now but not yet. This passage reminds us that God's love has the capacity to remake the world in ways that we would not have imagined if we keep clinging on, looking backwards to what was. This devastating blessing comes to her and she claims it as a gift and celebrates. You know, sometimes we have ideas of how things should be, and we don't want to see any other way. We think that whatever we want must be God's will, and we close ourselves to God's plans. We think that God can only function in certain places or people or ways, and we miss where God is actually moving. But sometimes we hear God calling us, and like Mary, we're able to hear things in a new way and say nothing is impossible with God. On this day, release what no longer serves God or life so that something new can manifest. And because change is going to happen, whether we're ready or not. Change happened to Mary, and she chose to embrace it and nurture it and own it. I mean, maybe you've been asked to accept some change that you never asked for, that you were never looking for, the loss of a dream or a way of life or an ability. So how now will you live? With rage or acceptance or grief, grace? What do you do when your life doesn't turn out at all like you expected? There's an essay that was written back in the 80s called Welcome to Holland by Emily Pearl Kingsley, and it's about having a child born differently than other children. And she talks about the metaphor of the excitement of planning a trip to go to Italy that became something else when the plane suddenly lands in Holland. Holland, she says, what do you mean Holland? I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to be in Italy all my life. I dreamed of going to Italy. Capisce? She didn't say capisce, but she should have. But this idea is that we had this expectation of where we're going and what it's going to look like. And she says this trip to Holland is raising a child who is not like everyone else's child. She goes, everyone else, you know, is busy coming and going from Italy, and they're all bragging about what a wonderful time they had there. And for the rest of your life, you'll say, well, yeah, that's where I intended to go. That's what I planned. But in the end, she sees that the trip is more than worth it. Because if you spend your life mourning the fact that you didn't get to Italy, you'll never enjoy the amazing, lovely things about Holland. Mary's birth announcement was unlike most others. She claimed that God was going to turn things upside down and had the audacity to be joyful about it. Break open and be blessed. Change is coming. So how do we live? So what Holland maybe have you found yourself, or what Nazareth? So are you going to stay broken by shock and tumult or disappointment, or will you, like Mary, open yourself to what is rather than looking at what is not? Will you be able to enjoy the tulips where you are, or will you be able to recognize this devastating blessing for what it is? Mary's song turned the world upside down, and God is still turning the world upside down. But only if we choose to participate, if we're willing to do this work, to testify to the God of life. So release what no longer serves this so that God may emerge anew. God is about to do a new thing. Amen.